This podcast is sponsored by Tusk, a continuity of business solution for industries that struggle with traditional banking. Check them out on the web at tusk.network. The Rob McNealy program is the nexus of cryptocurrency, blockchain technology, and entrepreneurship. Now, welcome to the program. Today, we're talking to David Z. Morris. He is an amazing author and writer. I could go into his entire bio, but I think it's better from him because he's just done way too many cool things. But he has been on the show before, and I'm glad to see him again. David, how the heck are you?
I'm good. So you want me to run down what's been happening?
Well, for the people who don't know who you are, which I don't believe there are that many people, but give a little bit of background. Who are you and why are you on my show?
I think we talked about 6 months ago on the show before. And at the time I was working for a magazine called Breaker. We were covering cryptocurrency exclusively. Unfortunately, Breaker ended. And I'm now a staff writer for Fortune magazine, covering, and I run the cryptocurrency newsletter there, which is called The Ledger, and everybody should go to fortune.com/newsletter and sign up for those. I also have a new book out called Bitcoin is Magic that is mainly about the way people communicate about cryptocurrency and the role of, and actually we were, before we started recording, you were talking about your efforts to market and promote your own project. And a lot of the book is about how something like Bitcoin or Tusk relies a lot on a community to create it collectively, and the way people communicate about it to kind of give it the reality and value that it has. So that's kind of the main theme of the book.
Well, tell us a little more. So what was the genesis of this idea for the book?
I got a severance package from Breaker.
Nice.
I decided that I should use it to do a big project to try and kind of like sum up a lot of the bigger and more weird ideas I had about crypto over, it's been like 5 years of writing about it now. So, and there is this another topic that might be of interest to you and your listeners. There's a big section in there about some of the crummy crypto media that the space has had to deal with over the last few years, from like pay-to-play scandals to conflict of interest, and a big section on, actually, this is something that we can talk about and we can pick back up in a bit, but I have a pretty substantial bit in the book about Forbes and how some of its policies have been really bad for scams and misleading projects in the space. And the guy who used to run Forbes, or at least Forbes.com, is in the news recently because he took over a site called Deadspin, and the entire staff left because he was so bad. So that's media and communications stuff. But the impetus for the book, aside from just wanting to kind of it was just a pleasure to write. I had time, I just did it. There's some ideas and some parts of it that don't fit neatly into an article. So that's why you write a book. And so there's a lot of stuff in there about everything from like, Anton LaVey and Satanism and ancient magicians and how they used code and how they related to the world, and how a lot of what people back in the day thought of as magic was all about belief, and money is also about belief. That's kind of another one of the big ideas in the book, is that whether something is considered money basically depends on how many people believe that it's money. And that's kind of the subtext of the title, is that we're all kind of engaged in this collective magical thinking about money, and there's a lot of different things that support that, and we're all whether you're buying Bitcoin or buying Tusk or buying Ether or whatever your particular ecosystem happens to be that you're choosing to, or if you're still exclusively focused on dollars, you're part of this collective project that is a little bit like people coming together to cast an incantation. metaphorically speaking, to make this thing real that's actually nothing but a piece of paper or digits or things like that. So,
well, I think at the heart of it is, all value is subjective. But I think, and that's pretty, that's pretty common, like Austrian economics, right? All value is subjective, and I think it really is that way. But I think where a lot of value comes from is utility and what utility you're bringing to
Absolutely.
people. And so I agree with you. So in your
I think
book,
you have to have both. Yeah. So, I mean, you have to have a functional technology that works as a currency or medium of exchange, or, and like Bitcoin can't be hacked or anything like that. This is my cat, by the way,
nice.
literally putting his butt in my face. So yeah, you have to have the actual utility, you have to have the actual technology, but then in addition to that, you have to have a community, and they all have to kind of be on the same page and regard themselves as part of this larger thing, in order for the money to have value.
So in your book, how did you express, or how did you see as crypto is different than, say, other products out there that are being marketed and sold to a community?
Well, what kind of other products, like other payments
Yeah,
technologies?
what's different about crypto and how it's communicated versus, say, Visa or MasterCard or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, I do think it relies a lot more on this sense of mission, and it's sort of the double-edged sword of, it sort of seems like it has, I mean, it has tamped down because the ICO craze is over, but in crypto, you're very focused on like the relative price of the coin that you're using, because it's kind of a metric for how you're competing with other currencies or existing fiat currencies. And in some cases that can be very shallow, like that can be a distraction if you're only paying attention to price and you're just like trading and not thinking about the bigger picture of how does this work. In your case, you're reaching out and specifically trying to teach people how to use something, and so that price can be a distraction, but it is also it instills this sense of mission and this idea that we're going to go out and evangelize, and we believe in it because of X, Y, and Z, and we're going to teach other people. And so and that's all, Visa, there's just a company, but with crypto, ideally you have, in the most successful projects, you have pretty decentralized communities. I mean, Bitcoin, obviously that's true. I think it's increasingly true in Ethereum. You kind of still have a few very influential people, but there's a lot of stuff going on elsewhere. And so I find that to be a pretty optimistic signal. And I actually got to give some credit to, Balaji Srinivasan, who was formerly the CEO of Earn.com, which was bought by Coinbase and became their education platform. And Balaji is like one of the smartest people you ever hear talk. He was on What Bitcoin Did, and they had a great talk about the idea that crypto can become this kind of virtual nation state because people share values and kind of buy into something based on not just the payments aspect of it, but other things. I mean, Ethereum is the best case. Well, I mean, Bitcoin and Ethereum both have this going on. There are cultures around them. It's not just this is a technology. There's a certain ethos, there's a certain philosophy, and so that aligns the interests of all the people who have decided to join these projects or support the projects or even just buy into them, in terms of not just technology, but values and community. And it's very interesting. I think that Ethereum is a great example where I think they'll all admit that, like even the people at the top admit that Ether as it exists now, or Ethereum as it exists now, doesn't quite work the way it's supposed to. So the technology is not quite there, and they're still trying to figure out how to get the technology there. But in the meantime, they have this incredibly strong community that is helping carry them forward. And, nobody seems acutely angsty about the fact that their technology doesn't work all that well. It's a collective project that they're working on. And so that idea of we're going to come together as a collective that isn't organized around a company like Visa or, any other, it's not a bank, which is owned by a couple of people. It's definitely a collective. And, I think that that's something new in money. And I think that that is kind of an underappreciated aspect of all of this that is really interesting, and it'll be fascinating to see where things go from there.
So as things go forward, do you think that this community-based, this community-driven thing, do you think it's going to peter out, or do you think that, these community-based products really have a good shot at becoming really, really mainstream?
I don't know about mainstream, but I don't think you have to become mainstream. I mean, I named Bitcoin and Ether, but there are other interesting projects like Decred. I'm sure I could come up with a few more if I thought about it for a while, where, they're not gigantic, and they're not really known outside of very select circles. But they're doing active outreach. They have particular principles that they work on. And those people, they come together. You don't have to have, and I mean, that's the thing about community, right? You don't have to have everybody. You just have to have the people that you have. And they're going to kind of incrementally grow, I think. And that, if you're looking at it from an investment perspective, that growth of the community is key to the growth of the value and adoption of a project. So the social dynamics are kind of key to making all of these things successful. And that's again, like kind of the big underlying theme of the book.
If you had to look at your magic 8-ball, do you see the crypto space getting more diverse with disparate projects that kind of interoperate, or do you just see the more likely outcome is just going to centralize into a few major projects?
I mean, I think that is one question where technology really comes into it, because there are a few people like at Cosmos and Polkadot, they're working on interoperability standards that will allow things to move across blockchains. You already have stuff like wrapped Bitcoin on the Ethereum network. And there are other kinds of interoperability that already exist kind of on a small scale on a case-by-case basis. And so when you get to a point where there's more there is actually interoperability technology that is being developed or that is already out there. And I haven't really thought hard about what the implications of that are, but definitely one of them is that different things can coexist and interact, and there will be dynamics around that interaction that I think are unpredictable. But I think that we're definitely going to be, obviously we're going to be in a multi-blockchain world because there are specialty blockchains that are built for particular purposes. The question of whether we're going to be in a multi-cryptocurrency world, I think I think that you can be a Bitcoin maximalist in some sense by thinking that this is kind of the most sound thing and you can build stuff on top of it. But I don't think there's that many people who can plausibly argue now that, and this is the most common single crypto argument, that that Bitcoin will eat everything.
Right.
Technologically, it's not going to happen because there's no way you're going to get the consensus to rewrite the Bitcoin code to a degree that will allow it to be liquid enough for, coffee or whatever. And so you're going to have, whether it's Lightning built on top of Bitcoin or different chains that can do faster stuff and then settle to Bitcoin, or just things that live in two different ecosystems at once. I think that there's going to be a lot of interesting interactions, but yeah, there's going to be a lot of different, or I guess the question isn't whether there's going to be one crypto or many. The question is whether there's going to be a dozen cryptos or 100. And I think if just at this exact moment, I think if you ask me 2 days from now, I might give a different answer. But I tend to be in the school of thought that there's going to be 100. But the 100 that are big right now are not going to be the 100 that are big 10 years from now. because things are going to churn and there's going to be new technology. But I think I believe in a multi-crypto, multi-blockchain future.
So what is your take on smart contracts platforms? Like there's multiple projects out there that are trying to do that. You know, you got ETH and EOS and Tezos and, you know, a bunch of other ones I'm not even super familiar with. Do you think that, this is the question I have, do you think there's actually a market for smart contracts platforms that are like public ledgers versus, you know, or do you think like enterprises will just build their own for a specific application? What do you think is more likely to happen? Because, you know, I keep coming back to, as an entrepreneur, you know, things like market size, number of customers, and how do you get your customers? And I'm a simple guy, right? To me, customers are people that are willing to pay to use your system, right? It's not just someone who's investing. I don't believe an investor is a user. Now, a lot of people make that argument, but I don't believe that an investor is a user, you know? So to me, you know, that's why I don't like you were talking about market cap being like, you know, a metric. I also think that it's a bad metric. And I also think wallet holders is a bad metric as well, number of wallets. But, you know, I'm always curious about what you're seeing out there, because you're getting, you get around probably a lot more than I do in this space. You know, is there an actual real good use case for smart contracts now that the ICO world is dead?
I mean, I think that there were sort of two different questions, or two related questions there. The main one, I think, is, well, first I'll answer I'll try and answer the sort of subsidiary question, which is, you know, public smart contract platforms versus basically consortiums or permissioned platforms. And I think that it's a really good and unanswered question, because, you know, I'll get to the smart contract thing in more detail, but I think that smart contracts are a viable idea and there are use cases for them, but a lot of them will be sort of, here are 10 companies that need to interact in a particular way for this to be more efficient. And, you know, there are examples in, I think, logistics and shipping is a pretty good one. But those don't need to be public, you know, and they certainly don't need to be proof of work. And proof of work for those projects is wasteful. And so you can do something that's, it doesn't even have to be proof of stake. It can just be these 10 people 10 entities all have transparency into this blockchain, and they're running nodes and they're talking to each other, and it's very cheap and fast, but it's still a smart contract, but it's not public. And so I think that there will be some of that. I mean, none of the projects doing that have really caught on at this point, but the level of continued, say hello to Steve's ass.
I love Steve's ass.
And he's gonna knock something down. So that's like, but to get to the bigger question, smart contracts. I do think that there are enough use cases that right now seem kind of isolated and unclear, just in terms of, like, you know, recurring payments. A recurring payment is a smart contract, and obviously we do that with our credit cards now, but there are lots of reasons people don't like credit cards. You can do it with your bank now. All the same reasons that you don't want a bank in the US to have total control over what you do with your money are reasons that smart contracts will be appealing to people. As far as, but I also think, I don't know the numbers, so, you know, this is sort of speculative, but I have a sense that the projects that fall under so-called DeFi are starting to attract users in a certain sense. And a lot of these users are active traders of crypto, but the products that are getting built do have at least potential larger audiences. So, you know, they're not great right now because you have to be over collateralized, but being able to take out a loan on a blockchain that is secured against some sort of asset that is also on a blockchain is pretty interesting. And it requires probably a decade or two of continued development for that to be both user-friendly enough and for there to be enough stuff on blockchains for that to be viable. But I think it's an interesting and potentially attractive use case for some people. And right now, the people who are using it are, like people who would be on Wall Street doing financial games, which you don't necessarily have to love, but it's a part of the world, and it's pretty interesting to see that can break out of, it's not just Lehman Brothers doing like leveraged stuff. It can be just anybody on their computer at home, or whether you're in Mexico or the U.S. or anything like that. I think that is interesting, at least. I mean, I'm not going to come out and say like, yes, DeFi is going to eat the world, but it's interesting. I will say that.
Well, I think I'm keeping my eyes open. I think the space there's so many moving pieces and things that are moving so quickly. It's going to be interesting to see where things are in, 6 months to a year. I mean, the horizons right now and the rate at which things are changing, whether it be regulation or technology or just consumers or the economy. It's crazy how fast things are moving around in this space. The last time you were on here, we did discuss, things like exchanges and fake volumes. That was part of our past conversation. Have things changed much in the exchange side of things? Have you seen that space is just the way it was before 6 months ago, or are things improving, getting worse? What's your take on that?
In terms of exchanges?
Exchanges,
yeah, it's actually interesting. My only real observation on exchanges at this point is that there's way too many of them, and people are launching them left and right. And I think that there's going to be, and I was talking a little bit about this with Frank Chaparro from The Block, like there's going to be a shakeout. Circle just sold Poloniex to apparently a consortium run by Justin Sun. They weren't able to get enough volume for a US-based exchange to make it worthwhile as a relatively large company for them to keep doing it. So yeah, there's going to be, I mean, the good thing is we have, I think and maybe I just haven't been paying attention, there have been a couple of collapses and exits, but things are consolidating and things are getting more responsible and more above board, especially with the US exchanges now being more regulated, and there's different feelings about that. But I think that we're going to see fewer outright scam exchanges, but as far as businesses go, it's a thing that people are trying to do because it has proven to be able to make money. I mean, Coinbase and Binance make a ton of money, but whether that's still going to be true if there's not other stuff happening a year or two from now to justify all of the underlying trading going on these platforms. Or I shouldn't say underlying. The underlying is, are these useful projects? Is this stuff that actually works and does things for people? The trading is the speculation on top of that. And if there's not stuff that gets pick up and is actually useful and meaningful, then the speculation will end, and even the big exchanges right now won't last. But certainly exchanges starting now, they're in for a tough time, because I think we're at a sort of low ebb of interest in the speculation side of things, and I know that you've had some issues with getting listed on exchanges, and there continues to be discussion around that and what's appropriate and what's not, and in terms of listing fees. And I think that recently came up, and I'm gonna forget, but there was a coin listed on Binance that they claimed. Anyway, I'm not gonna remember who was involved, so I'm not gonna try and tell that story. But yeah, the exchanges are still charging sometimes huge listing fees, and maybe if you have like a small exchange that is reputable, and the technology is democratizing, so it is in some ways easier to build them. So maybe small exchanges can become cottage industries of some sort, but I think that launching big ones or trying to get big at this point is pretty tough, because there's just too many out there.
Well, since we're going to our Tusk mainnet soon, we've been again re-engaging with exchanges, and yeah, we're getting quotes anywhere from 3 to 10 BTC right now just to get on mid-level exchanges.
Yeah. Yeah.
which to me is still outrageous. But that's the business model, really. The exchange business model currently, unless you're like a legitimate top 3 exchange,
Yeah.
your business model is listing fees. That
Yeah.
really is the business model.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like a catch-22 as a project, right? Unless you have, if you're on the tiniest exchanges that will take a risk on you for little to nothing, you're not going to get enough volume on those little exchanges
Yeah.
to get on a bigger exchange that is more reputable. So you got to pay to get on some of these exchanges to get the volume that you can
Yeah.
then make an application to a more reputable or bigger exchange. And there's a sequence that has to
Yeah.
go in. And
Well, but
so,
that's also, that doesn't necessarily sound terrible if there is actually a path towards
right,
organic growth. Then, if you as a, project creator, I think that the problem with exchange listing fees is when there's a problem from your perspective as a project lead who obviously wants to get visibility for your project. But if there are also projects where there is no substance there, but they happen to have the money for the listing fee, and then that becomes legitimation in itself.
right.
So, there's a signaling problem there if, you're looking at whether something is on a big exchange as a sign of whether it's a good project. And so, that's a problem with the model. And, I think that there is a lot to be said whether, there are obviously some frustrations, but even just sort of from a conventional business standpoint, organic growth is still a viable way to grow any business, including hopefully a cryptocurrency. If you're, as you are, out there kind of pounding the pavement, talking to people about it, differentiating yourself. And, if I hope there are paths for that now and in the future, but, if the only way to get somewhere where people can buy your token is to pay $50,000, then that is a problem for the ecosystem.
Well, it definitely makes it harder, and I understand risk, but I think going forward, I think things are going to change, and I think I think part of the ICO world is there's still people that have that taste of ICO money, so they still have an expectation. But I
Yeah.
think ICOs are dead, and they're dead because they were all illegal, and they're not going to happen again. So I think
Yeah.
that rush of misappropriation of investor funds is
Absolutely.
not there anymore.
Yeah.
But I think. I think it's interesting. I've been talking to some people about what's happening with the American market as far as exchanges go. And I think what's going to end up happening is that the American exchanges are going to have to delist the illegal ICO token projects that were out there and probably
Mm.
privacy coins. At least that's kind of what I'm hearing. What are you hearing in that kind of world as far as the American market goes?
Well, there's definitely a lot more restrictions coming on. Obviously, I don't know about. Coinbase has never traded Monero, which is, to my mind, one of the actual privacy coins. So I think that if there are, and I don't know enough. I guess Kraken probably trades Monero, but I don't know. I haven't heard anything specific about that. You might know more than I do. But I would be, yeah. It would be, I think, a bad thing if that were to happen. If they had to delist the privacy coins. Now the ICOs, I think that's going to be tougher because that kind of gives a lot of power to the exchanges to decide what's legitimate. Obviously, if they're getting like legal blowback, that's a different story. But if they're just sort of defensively delisting ICOs, I don't know I don't know what I think about that. It feels like that's not a decision that they should be in the position to make necessarily. I'm with you that it's not necessarily a bad thing if that's the outcome, but the implication is that again, an exchange is a gatekeeper to legitimacy, and I would love for some of these decentralized exchange projects to actually work, because I don't necessarily think that the exchanges should have that gatekeeping power, whether because of fees or because they just don't like something. But I don't have intel on what the status of those are.
I think some of the future I see is going to be the atomic swap wallet technologies. That it's just
Yeah.
I like the idea of the DEXs to get more popular, and these hot swap wallets that are non-custodial, or
Yeah.
atomic swap wallets that are non-custodial. And I think I'd love to see that. The problem with a lot of those wallets is that their volumes are not reported to the tracking things like CoinGecko and CoinMarketCap. So,
Yeah.
so there may be a lot of volume there that no one's aware of. And so that's again where I think like we don't have a lot of good signals out there for people,
Yeah.
because we have
But
these metrics
yeah.
like CoinMarketCap and
Yeah, that one seems
CoinGecko.
like there's got to be a solution there, because we figured out how to get better data out of exchanges slowly. I mean, the exchanges continue to lie, so that's still noisy itself. But yeah, I mean, it seems like there would be market forces that would encourage those atomic swaps to also report volumes in some way eventually. But
Yeah.
yeah, right
I
now
think
it's
it's I
not
think
as
it's
useful.
the trackers themselves that are not pulling that data for a variety
Mm.
of reasons. So, you're out there in the space. What do you think's coming next? What are the things that you're working on right now as far as projects and, writing assignments? Are you got any good dirt on anything you want to talk about?
I don't know about dirt, but I mean, despite the bear market for tokens, there does continue to be a lot of interest in a lot of the underlying technology. I think that there's I should have looked this up. I should have reminded myself before we got on the phone here, but there is some funding news that actually, let me be really a terrible podcaster and look this up real
That's
quick.
my job. I'm the terrible podcaster,
Um,
but
because I think there is a very interesting company that I actually do want to make sure um, I mention, and remind myself, they're called Duality. So there's a company called Duality Technologies, and what they're doing is it's not a cryptocurrency, but it's based on a lot of the same technology, and it's totally fascinating. So they use technology that's related to ZK snarks, which is zero knowledge
Zcash,
proofs. Yes,
Zcash, right?
yeah, it's used in Zcash, and Duality's founders were some of the people who helped come up with that. And essentially, what they do is they package sensitive data and they cryptographically wrap it in a particular way that actually allows it to be processed for big data and AI applications. So, for example, they can take a bundle of health data or even an individual's health data and turn it into, like, cryptographically encode it in such a way that it can still be processed without revealing any of the data or putting it out publicly. And they just got a good chunk of Intel, or a good chunk of investment from Intel and a few other people. And so that's like crypto, but not cryptocurrency. And I think it's very interesting to see that overlap. And I think there's going to be more instances of that, of technology that we've seen applied in blockchain and crypto, that's going in a different direction and being applied to other problems. And I'm pretty optimistic about that, especially because on the flip side, obviously the last 3 to 4 months, I guess, the news cycle has really been dominated by Libra and Facebook, which, is, I've been, since back in Breaker days when this first came out, I've been very skeptical of the Libra project, and it has been good, I think, to see the pushback coming from, senators and Congress people who may not all be skeptical for the right reasons, but mostly are just skeptical because Facebook has proven that they don't deserve our trust. And I think that is optimistic too. I think that Libra could still become something, but it's been gratifying to see some of that pushback happen. And then on the sort of flip side of the same coin, 2 weeks ago we had China announce that their central bank will issue some kind of digital currency, which I think I'm willing to bet pretty good odds is going to be, centrally managed, not transparent, and entirely designed to monitor Chinese citizens and even
Sure.
non-Chinese citizens. And so that's, I think for a while people have been warning that, we realized, a few years in that, oh wait, Bitcoin is not nearly as private as we thought. And so this idea that public ledgers, or, some sort of blockchain system can actually be used to monitor and control people instead of making them free if you kind of subvert the technology enough. There's been warnings about that for a while, and it's now really coming true in ways that are pretty scary, because I think that, a lot of what's happening in China is really bad. And so to see that used, to see technology that, people like you and me are supporters of, kind of twisted in that way is really, really discouraging. And obviously, unlike, Facebook has to push back against the US government, which still has at least some pro-human principles. And the, CCP coin doesn't have that problem. They can do whatever they want. They're in charge. So we're going to see, honestly, some bad stuff come out of that, I think. And I think that is the biggest story in cryptocurrency right now, even though, neither of those are cryptocurrencies. They're just kind of, especially in Facebook's case, it's been very interesting to watch them use some of the same language, some of the same ideas about like banking the unbanked and frictionless global payments, that Bitcoin was launched trying to pursue those ideas. And now to see them kind of in, frankly, the wrong hands has been discouraging. But again, like, it's nice to see all the pushback that they're getting, because I think they deserve it.
Well, I totally agree with you. I don't believe that pretty much anything the Chinese government does is in the best interest of the individual at all. It's always it's always designed to further the power and central control of the state. And so if they get all excited about something, I'm going to probably take the opposite view, that it's probably not a good thing, because they're never going to support technologies that give away their power. And I think that's where it's like I get a little confused by some of the messaging I see from crypto influencers that get all excited about that news. And I always just caution, look, these are not people that care about individual liberty or freedom or decentralization by any stretch. So if they're looking at it, they're looking at it as a way that they're trying to get ahead of it, and they control it. And so, and I think you're right on that, but I think Libra was probably a corporate version of that.
Absolutely. Like I said, two sides of the same coin.
I think I had mixed feelings about Libra. I thought on one hand, it would be an Orwellian hellscape with all the data that people give them as far as personal information, that combine that data with your financial transactions. And I think they would be very successful if they launched, because I think they could just monetize it all through Messenger and Facebook Marketplace and things. On the other hand, I thought it could be interesting for them to mainstream crypto and then figure out a way to ride on their coattails, because they would have to create lots of on and off ramps for that to work. But the one thing that I wish somebody would do that had the lobbying power is get the IRS to change and how they elect to regulate crypto transactions instead of property, but maybe as, say, like a foreign currency or something. And I was hoping Facebook would have dealt with that problem, because somebody's got to deal with that. But I'm glad it's stalled, because, I don't trust Zuck and Zuck Bucks any more than I trust CCP coin. As far as, do you want, so the question, the only difference there is Zuck doesn't have his army to go enforce his edicts yet, whereas the Chinese government does. But other than that, I mean, they're just a surveillance platform. And so in giving all your personal information on top of your financial transactions on top of that's just Orwellian and scary to me.
And you've identified a really interesting dynamic with some of the people who are excited when anybody does anything that's remotely close to crypto, there are a lot of these people who don't have the sort of, frankly, ideological commitments that something like Bitcoin was founded on. There are arguments about how this, and this is years old, there are arguments about how this underlying blockchain technology could be useful for this, that, and the third. And, maybe there are some efficiencies ultimately in, something like T0 where you're trading stocks on the blockchain, or, and maybe there are long-term investments that have nothing to do with politics where you can use this stuff in whatever way to accomplish something. But, that's totally separate from being grassroots. Bitcoin is not really a business, you can, I think that there are some people who obviously made a lot of money off of it. But maybe one of the things that I would really hope to see is an end to speculation in Bitcoin. I think that the price is never going to be stable, and there is a certain adoption value in the idea that, Bitcoin is going to be worth $50,000, Bitcoin's going to be worth $1 million, whatever. But I just think it undermines a lot of the ideas that are the things that gave it value in the first place. So I've always been uncomfortable with speculation. Obviously, it fuels a lot of what happens in the space. Ether money is doing all kinds of weird and interesting stuff, and I can't hate that too much. But it is sort of things interact in unhealthy ways when you're focused on speculative gains.
Well, and I agree with you. And I personally believe that, volatility is driven by the speculation. If,
Right.
If people were actually using Bitcoin for transactions in large volumes, that would stabilize out. And that's what I kind of express to people, is that everybody's talking about stable coins. I'm like, the best stable coin is your coin, just used a lot.
Yeah, exactly.
And to me, and I agree with you, is like where you hear things like staking rewards and things, I'm like, you're actually incentivizing people not using your coin as intended when you do things like that. And to me, that's what we're doing with Tusk, is we're focused on getting adoption, getting users, and not speculators. I don't care about the speculation price. I care about people using it because we're trying to solve a problem. But, we're almost out of time here. So this has gone by really fast, and I love chatting with you, and I love your take on things. Where can people find out more about your book and you?
The book, I actually just got done putting together the paperback. This is all self-released. I didn't want to deal with editors or anybody telling me to not say exactly what I wanted to. So I just put it out. And I also wrote it really quickly. And so it's got a kind of like a little bit of a stream of consciousness, conversational quality to it that I hope is enjoyable to read. But it's just on Amazon. I wish there was a easy to use crypto funded payments platform for selling books and ebooks. That would be great if somebody wants to build that. But for now, it's just on Amazon, and the title is Bitcoin is Magic. So that's easy enough to look up and find. And it's got a really cool cover that I am very happy with. Otherwise, I'm on Twitter at David Z. Morris. And my work is on fortune.com every day, more or less.
David Morris, thank you so much for coming on today.
Awesome. Thanks, Rob. Thanks for having me on. Sorry this took so long to make happen, but it's been a crazy few months.
Thank you for listening to the Rob McNealy program. Make sure you check us out on the web at robmcnealy.com and subscribe to our podcast at YouTube, iTunes, and on the Google Play Store.